Welcome back to another deep dive. We're here to, unpack complex topics, get you informed, maybe even a little surprised along the way. Today we're heading to Malaysia. It's a nation known for its incredible mix of cultures, languages, and, let's be honest, amazing food. But beneath that vibrant surface, there's this really deep debate about the country's identity, specifically focusing on its vernacular schools. So the big question we're tackling is this. Are Malaysia's vernacular schools the ones teaching mainly in Mandarin and Tamil, alongside the national language, Bahasa Malaysia? Are they actually holding the nation back from this ideal of one nation, one language? Or is there something else going on entirely? Our mission here is to really get into this complex, often quite fiery debate. We'll look at the history, the educational data, the social dynamics from the sources you've shared with us. We really want to get to the heart of this linguistic tug of war, figure out what it all means. Well, for you.
Yeah, and it's important to say right off the bat, this isn't a simple black and white issue. It's not binary. The reality is, frankly, a lot messier and honestly, much more interesting than just a patriotic slogan you might see on a bumper sticker. We're going to explore why this debate just keeps going, seems almost as persistent as, say, rush hour traffic in KL.
Okay, good analogy. So let's start right at the beginning then. How did Malaysia even end up with this, well, pretty unique setup for education? What's the history here?
Well, the roots, they really go back to the colonial period. Under British administration, they sort of allowed the different ethnic communities to set up and run their own schools. This was partly about providing some education, sure, but it was also, pragmatic. It helped keep the peace among diverse groups.
A kind of divide and manage strategy, perhaps?
Yeah, you could see it that way, perhaps unintentionally at times. Then, after independence in 1957, there was a choice to make. They could have gone hard on a Bahasa Malaysia or bust approach, but again, pragmatism won out. Article 152 of the Constitution actually protects mother tongue education. So that gave Chinese and Tamil schools a legal footing, a place right within the new national system.
And the scale today is pretty significant, right? You mentioned the numbers, about 1,300 Chinese primary schools, 500 or so Tamil ones. And what's really interesting from our sources is these aren't just classrooms. They're seen as like cultural fortresses for these communities.
Exactly. They're deep cultural anchors. Chinese schools, for example, have strong backing from groups like Dongzong. They're very focused on preserving Chinese medium education. They produce lots of Mandarin-fluent graduates. Tamil schools play a similar role for preserving Dravidian heritage, though they often face more significant challenges with funding. But here's the rub, the point the critics raise, and it comes up in our sources quite a bit. They argue this system creates ethnic silos, that it weakens Bahasa Malaysia, the constitutional lingua franca, the common tongue.
Right.
And that leads to the question, is that a fair hit? Are the schools really the cause, or maybe just a scapegoat for, deeper societal divisions or quirks?
Okay, that ethnic silos point, it sounds quite persuasive on the surface. So the people arguing for one nation, one language, what's their core argument? What drives that?
It's actually quite simple, and that's part of its appeal. The idea is a shared language builds a shared identity. It helps smooth over those ethnic fault lines.
Makes sense.
It's a seductive argument in its simplicity, and there's some evidence cited in our sources to back this up. Studies suggest, for instance, that graduates from vernacular schools sometimes have weaker Bahasa Malaysia skills compared to those from national schools.
Okay.
And this, the argument goes, can hinder integration later on in university or the workplace. There was a 2020 survey, for example, finding 30% of Chinese vernacular students struggled with Bahasa Malaysia proficiency.
30%, okay. And what about the social side of things, the day-to-day interaction?
Well, that's the other main point. Vernacular schools, almost by design, tend to cater to specific ethnic groups. The data from 2023 showed something like 80% of Chinese schools, and remarkably, 95% of Tamil schools were ethnically homogenous.
Wow, 95%?
Yeah. So naturally, this means less daily interaction between students from different ethnic backgrounds during those really formative school years. And the concern is this might, unintentionally perhaps, reinforce stereotypes or just limit chances for kids to really understand each other across cultural lines.
You get that image, like you said before, of kids passing like ships in the night in the school corridors.
Exactly. And proponents of a single, unified system often look towards Indonesia. Indonesia successfully pushed Bahasa Indonesia as the national language, and many argue that really helped forge a stronger national identity there.
Right.
So the narrative is, without that common linguistic ground right from childhood, Malaysians might grow up in separate bubbles, reducing opportunities for genuine connection and, well, national integration.
Okay, that's a strong case for the unity perspective.
Hmm.
But hold on a minute, because these vernacular schools aren't just, hanging on. You said they're thriving.
Right.
And it's not just the minority communities using them, is it? What's the other side of the coin? What's the case for these schools?
Absolutely. The counterargument is just as strong, if not stronger in some ways. Advocates see these schools as absolutely vital cultural anchors. They preserve heritage, language, identity, history, worldview. It's all tied up together. Forcing everyone into one linguistic mold, they argue, would mean losing something incredibly valuable, diluting the very essence of these communities.
So it's about preserving culture,
Yeah.
fundamentally.
Yes, but what's really fascinating, and our sources highlight this shift, is the growing diversity within the schools themselves now. In 2023, about 20% of students in Chinese schools were actually non-Chinese.
20%, that's quite a jump.
It is, and that includes a noticeable trend of Malay parents choosing these schools for their kids.
Why is that?
Often it's down to a perception of higher academic standards, maybe more discipline, and critically, the advantage of learning Mandarin in a globalized world. So this kind of counters the silo argument, suggesting they might actually be becoming more like melting pots.
That's a powerful image, a Malay kid acing Mandarin while still singing traditional songs like Rasa Sayang. That speaks to a different kind of unity, maybe unity with diversity.
Precisely. And it's important to remember these schools aren't operating in isolation. They integrate the national curriculum. Bahasa Malaysia is taught, Malaysian history, civics, it's all there. A 2018 study even found no significant difference in reported national pride between students from vernacular schools and national schools.
Interesting, so the patriotism levels are comparable.
Seems so. And then there's the economic angle, which is huge. Multilingualism is, frankly, a superpower in today's world. Mandarin proficiency opens doors internationally. Graduates who can speak Mandarin or Tamil plus English and Bahasa Malaysia, they have a massive advantage in global business.
Right, that makes perfect sense. What about public opinion? Do we know what average Malaysians think?
Yeah, there was a recent poll, 2024, from the UCSI Poll Research Center. It was quite revealing. Around 70% of people surveyed agreed that vernacular schools don't hinder national unity. Only about 13% felt they were a stumbling block.
70%. That's a big majority.
It really suggests the general public might be way past the sort of binary either thinking that often dominates the political debates around this. Even the Ministry of National Unity seems to view them more as platforms for managing harmony rather than obstacles to it.
Okay, so this brings us right to the core puzzle, doesn't it? The paradox. Our sources paint a picture where these schools are seen as both a challenge and a benefit for unity. Why isn't it simple? Why can't it be just one or the other?
Well, because real life, especially in a place as diverse as Malaysia, is rarely simple. Forcing a single language, a monolingual system. History shows us that can backfire badly. Look at Sri Lanka's experience with its Sinhala-only policies that led to alienation and conflict. Malaysia's strength, arguably, is its pluralism, its ability to manage diversity, even if imperfectly.
So trying to force unity might actually break it.
That's the risk. The debate often gets framed as unity versus diversity, but that's probably a false choice. The real challenge isn't choosing one over the other, but finding a way for them to coexist and strengthen each other. And critically, it's not just about the schools themselves. Blaming schools for all the bumps in national cohesion is, well, it's like blaming the spoon for a badly cooked meal, as one source put it.
Right, it's just the tool, not the chef.
Exactly. There are so many other factors at play. Political rhetoric that sometimes fans ethnic flames, economic gaps between groups, religious differences, historical baggage. These things often play a much bigger role than the language used in primary school.
Okay, so if we accept schools aren't the sole issue, what can be done? What are the practical steps suggested in our sources?
There are several concrete ideas. Boosting Bahasa Malaysia proficiency in vernacular schools is often mentioned maybe through better teacher training, more immersive programs, and crucially, encouraging more interaction between different types of schools. Things like joint sports events, cultural exchanges, community projects. Pilot programs, like one in Johor back in 2022, showed these kinds of initiatives can really help bridge those ethnic divides.
And the government has programs for this already, right? Like the REMOP.
Yes, the Ministry of Education's REMOP program, Rancangan Integrasi Murid untuk Perpaduan, is specifically designed for that. It aims to foster interaction and unity through shared activities across different school types.
Okay. And looking outwards, are there lessons from other countries?
Definitely. International comparisons are really useful here. You look at Singapore's bilingual policy focused on English as the common language but supporting mother tongues, or Switzerland with its four official languages working together. India, with its incredible linguistic diversity, these places show multilingual education and national unity can go hand in hand.
So it's possible.
It's absolutely possible. But conversely, countries that tried to aggressively force linguistic assimilation often ended up with more social tension, not less. So the question for Malaysia is, how can it learn from both the successes and the mistakes elsewhere to find its own best path forward?
Right. So let's bring it all together. As we wrap up this deep dive back to that central question, are Malaysia's vernacular schools really holding the nation back from that one nation, one language ideal?
Well, based on everything we've looked at from our sources, the answer seems to be probably not. At least not in the way the more alarmist voices suggest. The nation isn't really being held back. It feels more like it's taking a different route, maybe a more scenic, definitely a more multilingual route towards its own unique form of national identity. These schools, they seem less like a barrier and more like a quirky, complex, but ultimately vital part of what makes Malaysia, well, Malaysia?
A quirky cog in the multicultural machine, perhaps.
That's a good way to put it. And the sources implicitly argue that unity doesn't have to mean everyone being the same. It's about finding that harmony in the diversity, like
Yeah,
a really good roti canai, different ingredients, perfectly spiced, coming together to make something delicious and uniquely Malaysian. This linguistic diversity, it's presented not as a problem, but actually as a major asset, especially now, a real competitive advantage globally.
so the real challenge isn't about scrapping the system, but tweaking it, making it work better.
Exactly. It's about optimization, stronger Bahasa Malaysia programs within these schools, yes. Actively creating more opportunities for kids from different backgrounds to mix and mingle through things like integrated activities.
Hmm.
And, crucially perhaps, less political grandstanding that just polarizes the whole issue. The recommendations lean towards things like better integration programs, maybe harmonizing parts of the curriculum like civics and history, even teacher exchanges between school types.
Build those bridges.
Build the bridges, yes. And maybe the final thought here, something that really comes through from the sources, especially that public opinion poll. It seems Malaysian society itself, the people on the ground, might have already moved beyond the rigid binary thinking that still dominates so much of the political talk.
The public gets it more than the politicians sometimes.
It certainly seems that way from the data. Maybe it's time for policymakers to, catch up with that reality, to fully recognize that in the 21st century, having multiple languages isn't Malaysia's weakness. It's arguably its superpower. The real task now is building those shared civic values, that sense of belonging together because of the diversity, not in spite of it. That's the foundation for a unity that's truly resilient because it embraces all that wonderful complexity.